What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 2 of the ALLSMITH project. Today's guest is the VP of Performance at FitLab and the Director of Performance for XPT. He's a performance coach and, most importantly, a future dad and an awesome all-around human, Mr. PJ Nestler. What's up, man? Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be back chatting with you.
I had to throw it out there in the intro, man, that you're soon to be a dad. The baby's due mid-March. When I throw that out there and it's kind of floating around in our conversation, what does it mean to you that you're soon to be a father?
It's super exciting for me, but I think what it means from a values perspective is the way it's shaped my thought process is like, it's now about me being a model and a leader, even more so than I have been in other spaces. Like, this is the truest opportunity to test my leadership and leading by example. So that's kind of what's been in Pearl and I's mind a lot is, this is really our time to show up as the type of people that we really want to be so that we can, help our son see what that example looks like.
What's so cool about that too, and we talk about it often on this podcast, you and I have talked about it before, but when you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And because you guys are so consistent within dialing in your habits, the service of other human beings, trying to dial in habits most importantly, and we'll definitely talk about that today in relation to James Clear and Atomic Habits, which I know you've talked about a lot. But I'm pumped to see you guys embark on the parenting journey and share all of the fascinating things that you share with all of us in the XPT community and see how it embarks on fatherhood and parenting and whatnot. Do you have any major fears associated with becoming a parent?
I don't know. I mean, certainly, I think there's two fears that stick out. The number one is having somebody that I'm so close with. Like, there's always a fear of loss for me due to some, my past and some stuff I've had. So I think of like now having the responsibility of this child, God forbid something were to ever happen. That's certainly a fear for me of, making sure that I'm able to protect him. And then, so I guess that's just kind of a fear of uncertainty.
Yep.
You never know what the future holds. And then I think the other fear for me is less of a fear, but certainly a consideration or concern is, how do I find the right balance between sharing the lessons and values that I believe in without overwhelming a child in the sense of the way where they go the other direction, and that's where I think a lot of Pearl and I focus on. It's just like, we just have to continue to be the people that we believe we can be and not preach all of the things we think that are super important, like fitness and health and all of those things, but model it. Yeah. And that's the stuff that we can just continue to model as much as we possibly can. So that's a big focus. It's just where is that balance between like imparting those lessons in a way that's helpful for development versus, being that overbearing parent that is like, this is the way things are done and the most important thing, which then makes, if my son is anything like me, it's going to make them go this direction. That's actually another fear. The other fear is that karma is going to come back, because I was not an easy child to parent from birth through 26 years old, basically. So that's the other fear, is that karma is going to come back and I'm going to have to deal with a child that was like me for the first 20 plus years.
I definitely want to unpack that a little bit later, but first and foremost, thanks for sharing that. It's one of those, it's a unique balance point, right? Where you want to teach them the lessons and show them the way, but you also have to step back and get out of the way and allow them to make the mistakes so they can learn from the school of hard knocks. And that's painful because you also anticipate the problems that they're going to face. And you're like, I was trying to prevent you from having those problems. But then simultaneously, it's like, you and I could probably both attest to this. Like, I've learned the best through painful experiences or by just learning the hard way. And you want to prevent that for your future child, but at the same time, that might be the only way that they actually get the lesson,
Yeah, Pearl and I talk about that a lot. Like, how can we create a path that minimizes excessive trauma, but allows for difficult experience.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I have this client that I've coached in the past that he was with me doing a training session. His son was kind of off to the side in the kids area, and he like stacked all of these different like boxes and toys, and he climbed up to the top to then be able to witness and observe his dad working out. And I was like, hey, do you want me to like go get him? He's kind of high, he could fall. And he was like, nope. Like if he falls, he's going to learn to never do that again. It's like, oh, but what if he breaks his arm or a wrist? Like it's tough, but it's also an important lesson to learn for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the best ways to learn not to touch a hot stove is to touch a hot stove, right?
For sure.
How has your role shifted in your relationship a little bit where, you guys are now married? Has that changed anything with the two of you guys? Like, would you give any advice to other people embarking on relationships in the form of enhancing expectations, optimizing communication, forming a deeper bond because you're now life partners for future expectations and life goals?
Yeah, I don't think there's been a major shift with us with being married, primarily because we were doing the work from the beginning. So I think what I've seen in friends, relationships and stuff, I think there's a lot of people who treat a dating relationship like this kind of social thing where they don't really have hard conversations and they don't dig into those things, and then they don't necessarily know the person they marry. They kind of do it based on feelings and emotions, and they don't make a really good choice about a partnership. So I think Pearl and I did a lot of that throughout our relationship, getting to know each other in each other's values and having difficult conversations. So once we were married, I think we just continue that. And it's certainly shifted as we think about parenting, because now it's less about sharing our values and more about aligning them, because there's certainly things that Pearl and I both do differently and believe in, and that's in a relationship, it's kind of okay. You both have your own tendencies, and as long as I can accept and respect hers, and she can respect mine, it's okay that we don't do a lot of the things similar, or we differ drastically in certain areas. It becomes much more challenging as we talk about, co-parenting a human, because now it's like, well, which side of those are we going to give? Which I think is going to be a really great thing for our child, because they're going to find a lot of balance in those things where Pearl and I can be a little extreme, but they'll get both sides of that, which I think is great. But yeah, I don't think there's been a ton of change. I mean, there's always I think there's just a difference in your mindset when you go into things, which is Pearl and I are both generally independent. I am super independent and have a tendency of, like, in previous relationships, when something goes wrong, I'm out the emergency exit. Like, I don't need this in my life. And that was it's always in the back of your mind. When you have a fight and you've been dating for 2 years, you're like, okay, I'm going to try to work through this fight, but if I don't get it, I'm out of here. And I think once you're married and you have a child on the way, that exit is not there anymore for me. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm in this. So stop. There's no escape plan. I just got to, the only way out is through, I guess. So you've got to just continue moving forward, and you don't have that to fall back on, which I think just forces you to be a little bit more mature and find solutions.
Yeah, that's really great context, man. And I can't help but note that you've actually talked about this very example in the form of cold therapy in the ice bath, where most people get into the ice bath and the negotiation starts, right? Oh, I got to get out of here. And you've depicted it very well, which is, if you're going to make that decision, take 3 breaths. And at the conclusion of the 3 breaths, striving to elongate the exhale. If you still want to get out, then get out. But typically after the 3 breaths, you've calmed the nervous system a little bit. You're now further along in the maturation of your negotiation strategy with yourself. And typically you're now in it, like you said. And I think it very much relates to the intimacy of a tough conversation or navigating the depth with a significant other, which is, all right, you're having a fight. Old PJ would have ran out the emergency exit, as you said. Now you're like, take deep breaths. I have the wherewithal to manage my physiology. I can shift my lenses and perspective to better understand Perla's side of the equation and maybe a bird's eye view perspective as well, I'm okay. I can practice the art of presence and be where my feet are. And it's just so cool just to hear you articulate that and share the metaphorical analogies about how all the things that you guys teach in XPT with performance breathing, exposure therapy, doing hard things, so much translates to the day-to-day life. It's not just about the X's and O's of training and strength training and performance and, you know, what happens in the arena. It's also what happens behind closed doors at home. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And what thoughts does that bring to mind when I articulate gently about like that 3 breath rule that you've shared many times in the ice bath, and how that analogy has really been a strong suit in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think it's a really great call out, and I think that's what's been so powerful for me with XPT is those correlations, both acutely. So that exact example you gave is how I work to show up in a difficult conversation when I'm quick to anger, right? The way that I deal with that anger emotion isn't always this way, but the practice is to show up the same way I do in an ice bath. But I think that the premise of it is you should never make a significant decision about, significant life decision when you're in a heightened state of arousal. And heightened state of arousal can be at the top or the bottom of that roller coaster. You're either super excited and all of that, and we all know, right? We all know when you agree to something at midnight when you've had a couple cocktails and you're with a bunch of your friends and you agree to what you're going to do the next day. And then the next day you're like, man, why did I agree to that thing? But you've done that in this heightened state of arousal where, inhibitions were gone. And then the same thing can be said for the bottom of that. When you're in a deep hole of anger or depression or, fear, acting out of that space is never going to produce the best results. So when we make a difficult decision or an important decision, the goal first is like, how do we get to the middle of that roller coaster where we can actually access our logical brain and make those conscious choices? And that applies chronically at the larger scale in relationships, like you mentioned, and also hyper acutely in the middle of an argument or the middle of an ice bath, where that 3 breath is the attempt there is to bring you into that balanced state, the middle of that roller coaster in that analogy I gave, so that you're not making the decision at the top or bottom where you're least likely to be able to access your rational thought processes, and you're most likely to make an emotionally driven decision. And a lot of that premise actually came, like when I started implementing that at XPT, a lot of that came from working with elite military. And one of the things I remember hearing from a few different people I talked to about, like, how do you get through buds? And one of the examples was, you don't get through you don't get through 3 months, 6 months of buds. You just get till lunch, or you just get till dinner, or you just get till the next session. And the thought of that is like, okay, how do we shrink this down? Don't worry about this massive thing. Like, how do we shrink this down and get focused? And then the next thing is, if you want to quit, I forgot who said this, but if you want to quit tomorrow. Mm-hmm. If you feel like you need to quit, no matter what you do, it's okay if you quit, but quit tomorrow. And the whole point of that is, the reason you feel like you want to quit right now is because you're at the bottom of that roller coaster. You're in this deep state of emotion. And when you're down there, you can't even see the way out. So you're just like, I'm going to be here forever. And the point is, like, no matter how bad it is, it will always subside. And then you'll get to a point slightly elevated where you can look back on it and be like, okay, well, now I'm on an upward trend, so I'm not going to quit right now. And it just gives you that opportunity in that moment. So I think taking those lessons from what can help elite military operators or people training for that pipeline can help them get through extreme situations, and then reframing that, because they're still humans. So the thought process, the nervous system, the applications are, or the principles are the same. The applications are just different. So that's a lot of what we do at XPT, is how can we reframe that in a way that works for people getting into an ice bath, which is may feel like a life or death situation for them, but is nothing like some of these other life or death situations that these people are facing, or an argument with your significant other that can feel like the worst possible thing in the world. But the reality is, that stress is always relative to the person facing it and the situation you're in. And so therefore the tools are going to be the same across the board there.
Yeah, so well articulated, man. I spoke to Andy Stumpf, and his terminology was make it to the next meal. And that narrowed his focus a little bit, where when he couldn't see light at the end of the tunnel, he could look down, he could see his boots. He was like, all right, I'm just going to stay focused on putting one foot in front of the other just to make it to the next meal. And that decreased his level of anxiety in relation to the totality of buds and training and how he's shared his experience with others. And I think all of us have to do that, right? It's the famous statement of what's the easiest way to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And right. I think the way you described it was really cool. Like, if you want to quit tomorrow. And it just delays it a little bit. It teaches the art of delayed gratification, which is so special. And then you've probably read Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. But it's the power of negotiation, right? Like our entire life is just a series of decisions. And if we can continually negotiate with ourselves and strive to make the next best decision, inevitably we're probably going to inch the needle slowly towards success. But I think I've heard you talk about it before, where it's like based on 100 decisions, the majority of those need to be the right ones. And if they're not the right ones, inevitably we're probably going to find ourselves either stagnant or headed in the wrong direction. And that's something that's so fascinating about all these tools that you guys share. It's using the tools that we have access to manage our physiology. And then based on managing the physiology, we can then manage our stress to then make better decisions in the midst of extreme conditions. And you better than most teach that so well. But did I kind of summarize that okay for people that are listening?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. As we jump into performance breathing, PJ, would you mind kind of summarizing what the difference is? Like, we're always talking about nervous system regulation. What is the nervous system, and how would you clearly separate the parasympathetic nervous system from the sympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, I think the nervous system is what drives pretty much everything behind the human body. It's the the highway from the brain to everything else, so that you can actually function. And the delineation between kind of the two branches of the nervous system, which is really a simplistic way of viewing it, and I like to make sure people understand physiology is never as simple as we make it sound. But generally speaking, we have these two branches of the nervous system that are responsible for these two states that we can be in. And one of those states being our fight, flight, or freeze state, which is going to be anything more towards a heightened state of arousal. So, I say fight, flight, or freeze, but really like super excited is also, there's also a lot of similarities to that. So if we say a heightened state of arousal, that's typically going to be driven by our sympathetic nervous system. So that means that we're a little bit more sympathetic nervous system dominant. And that's really just a language that we use for explaining a bunch of different responses that are happening in the body. And those responses are things like increasing your blood pressure, increasing your heart rate, narrowing your vision, dumping out stress hormones. And all of that is there to help your body get ready for this heightened state of arousal, because, based on when our physiology was designed a long time ago, we needed to be able to deal with whatever life was throwing at us. And back then, a lot of times that's dealing with danger. So we're recruiting all of the systems that are going to help us do that. And also inadvertently, or therefore, we're shutting down a lot of things that aren't necessarily going to help us. So we start to decrease digestion and salivary production, because those are all that's wasted resources, because we don't necessarily need those to deal with this current danger. So we'll start to shut those things down, and your body's just super smart at being able to turn on all of the right things to help you deal with the situation you're going to face. And then the parasympathetic would be the opposite side of that. That's where we're now reversing those responses, and we're going to decrease heart rate, decrease blood pressure, decrease stress hormones, increase tone and vagal tone, and get us into this rest and digest state, increased digestion, as I mentioned. And that's where we're going to be in the state where our body can really perform the most optimally. And when I say perform, I mean perform general maintenance tasks. So what our body's doing right now while we're just sitting here, which is all of the things that our cells and everything is doing just to keep us alive. And that's really the basis of your biology. It's not there to help you thrive in situations. It's there to keep you alive. So that's kind of the simple way to think of it. It's not a light switch, right? There's not just one's activated and the other's off, but you tend to be more dominant in one or the other. So as I move towards more sympathetic dominance, it's going to be all of those responses that I just mentioned. Or if I move towards more parasympathetic dominance, it's going to be more of that relaxation, rest, and digest type of response. So it's really just a simplistic way for us to talk about what's really a complex response in the body.
Honestly, man, I've been in a lot of science courses. That was one of the best depictions of the variance or the differentiation between the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic. That was really digestible. So I appreciate you jumping into that as well. And I would probably say most high performers that you and I cross paths with are going to lean a little bit more sympathetic. They're going to be more aroused. They're going to want to do, and they're going to want to be very, very task oriented. But what's so cool about what you do and what exposure therapy does is it gives people tools to then down-regulate that so they can turn on when they need to, but then back off also when they need to. Because you and I both know the sustainability long-term of keeping the nervous system highly aroused typically leads to burnout, injury, hormone imbalance, and a series of a decline in health biomarkers. And so with that being said, I'd probably argue most humans in their day-to-day are probably that way too, with social media exposure, with traffic, with different life circumstance that inevitably is going to cause a stress response or a fight or flight response. How do you help educate people on the importance of also down-regulating, but then also keeping in mind that it is important to up-regulate sometimes? Where does that conversation begin with you and some of your athletes?
Sorry, you froze there for 1 second. You said, how do you help people understand the importance of down regulating? And then I missed the end of that sentence.
Is basically like most people are going to think, hey, I need to be up. I need to be able to accomplish said task. I need to be ready for the demands of social media or traffic or being able to provide for my children. I'm just thinking on day-to-day tasks that can elicit a fight or flight stress response where people feel the need to be on. Where does the conversation begin for you in helping people understand the importance of down regulation and trying their best to be more parasympathetic when the time is right?
I think that the most important thing for people to understand, and what I try to help them understand, is one, what we just talked about with the nervous system. The next part of that is, okay, now I get the nervous system, but I need that arousal state to do my things. And I think when you teach people that those arousal states are designed to help you deal with, we'll call it extremes, and extremes are acute. They can't be long lasting because when you're burning a lot of resources. So you can only burn so many resources at a time before you have to start building that back up. And so it's kind of like if you think about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I've never used this analogy before, so if it's wrong, we'll see. But as I'm thinking through it, it's like your parasympathetic is putting deposits into your bank account. This is longer term investment, and you're building up this account. And then as you start to use your sympathetic, that's what you're withdrawing. You're using those resources. So if you just go sympathetic dominant all the time, you're just trying to draw from this empty bank account, and you're trying to use resources that aren't there. So you need to spend most of your time in that parasympathetic state. So you're building that long-term wealth, you're building investment, and then the resources are there when you need to use them, and you can use them as much as you need to. If you spent 10 years building this long-term wealth, there's a big difference between how you look at spending on a single day. But me, when I was 20, it's like, I'm not going to get the guacamole at Chipotle because that's an extra $250, But as you build longer term wealth, spending $1,000, $10,000 on a single day might not be a drastic impact to you because of what you've put into that account. So similar with the extremity with which we're dipping into that bank account in our physiology. And I think what people don't understand is that stress is stress, meaning it doesn't matter what type of stress you're facing. You don't get to choose when you're dipping in and you're taking stuff out of that account. So originally, we only dealt with certain types of stress. We had to run and chase dinner and chase it down, and we needed that was when we dipped into the bank account, and we're going to use whatever we need to go chase that down and capture our dinner, and then we'll bring it back and we'll spend a lot of time reinvesting all of that money. So we have it there for next time, or we're fighting against some, other animal that's trying to, come in and take our, trying to eat us, or somebody else who's trying to fight with our tribe. But all of those are very short lived. We deal with the stress, and then we go back and we start depositing into our account. The challenge day to day is that most people don't understand that the majority of the things that we deal with keep us in this heightened state of stress. You gave the examples of social media. Right now you'd say, oh, you're not in a state of stress, right? I'm just sitting in my office and a nice cool fan blowing on me, but I'm processing a lot of information. I'm trying to talk and communicate. You and I are having a conversation here. I'm kind of sweating a little bit, right? I'm in a heightened state of arousal compared to an hour ago when I was checking some emails and listening to music. So that is stress to my body. My body is noticing that like stress. And if I continue to just do that for 10 hours, if this is my life every day, I'm just doing these intense conversations for 10 hours back to back to back. And then I go have an intense conversation with my wife, and then I go work out for an hour. You're just not, I'm constantly pulling from a bank account that's going to be empty. So that's what I try to help people understand, why it's so important to be able to downshift so that you can flick that on when you need it, right? You need those resources available for when you really need them. And then you need to be able to turn that back off so that you're continuing to build that long-term wealth so it's available. So I think that's what's most important for people. And then the next step, and you mentioned the word that I like the most, which is the tools. And that's what we do at XPT. Is our job is to create a tools-based approach for people so that we can teach them the why. We need them to know it's important, because if you don't know it's important, you're not going to value the tools. But once you know it's important, then we need to actually give you the tools in a simple way that you can go apply. And that's a huge pet peeve for me, because I think there's so many people that are raising their hands saying, okay, I get it. I think it's important. And then they go read a book or listen to a podcast, and everybody just talks about why everything's so bad for you. Why sleeping is not good for you. And it's like, I don't need another book to tell me all of the negative things that lack of sleep is doing for me. I need a book that's going to tell me what to do about it. And that's what I think we're trying to do for people, is give you a really simple tool once you understand how important it is, or a toolbox.
And you do a great job of that, PJ. I appreciate you sharing the deposit analogy. That's definitely something that I think will resonate with a lot of people, especially in such a money-motivated society, for sure. And also just depicting, there are doses of stress too, right? Like when the cameras and the lights are on and you press that record button, it's now a different conversation than me picking up my phone and just texting you or calling you, and we're just having a conversation that doesn't have a level of permanence. And it might get messy, or there might be cussing. Now it's like, whoa, this might be here forever, and who knows what keyboard warriors are going to attack us for trying our best to depict authenticity, and maybe we misspeak. So it's like, that is a level of stress that maybe doesn't get associated because this right here doesn't look like assault bike intervals. And it's important for people to understand there's levels to the game of stress. So I think you did a really good job describing that, for sure. And also the tools component is really important. And you and I have talked many times where there's a spectrum, right? There's over here being the all or nothing, and then over here being like, we literally are saying these tools are the answers to the world's problems. And it's like, what I love about XPT is it's a very suggestive approach around sauna and ice can be very great tools. They're low impact. There's certain breathing protocols that can make it harder or easier. There's also a social component that allows for tribal and bonding and connection. And then there's the physiological component where the heart rate's getting elevated or decreased based on the stimulus and how frequently we may attack those levels of stresses. If we did that too frequently, too often, there's probably diminishing returns. And then if we don't do it enough, there's probably a heightened sense of arousal because there's not enough exposure and there's probably too much variance in the training. And you said it perfectly when you were talking to Gabby one time, and you're like, most people are loud screaming over here and most people are loud screaming over here, but the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And the appropriate dosage and usage of the tools intertwined with not just an optimal training protocol, but a healthy lifestyle is typically where the answers lie for total human optimization. Is that something that kind of aligns with you? And is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that it's also a unique challenge because as humans, we are attracted to those extremes. There's a reason that the dogmatic, let's use nutrition as an example. Like nobody said, when was the last time you heard somebody say, "Oh, I'm starting a new diet"? Okay, what's the diet? Well, I'm just going to eat a balanced approach. I'm going to be conscious about my eating. I'm going to eat a balanced approach to my macronutrients. I'm going to make sure that I prioritize protein and vegetables. I'm going to get a well-balanced. Nobody ever says that. The new diet is something with some name, and therefore it has rules that you have to follow. And it's we do this and we don't do this. And I think that's easier for people. They latch onto those things, and that's challenging because sometimes I'm like, maybe that's the catalyst that they need. But a catalyst quickly becomes a crutch. And if you said, I eat garbage every day, I have no semblance of consciousness to what I eat, and I just eat McDonald's most of the time, but I'm going to do the paleo diet, I'd be like, hell yeah, do the paleo diet. That's amazing. Or the keto diet, or the whatever diet. Because whatever diet it is, I guarantee you it's going to eliminate most of the crap that you eat. But when you get lost is, okay, now you start to do the keto diet, and then you're a keto guy, and that's what you do, and everything's keto, and keto is the answer to everything, and that's unfortunately what gets sold to a lot of people is like, then really quickly, let's say you were that guy, and 5 years of doing keto has gotten you to lose weight and feel awesome, and you start getting into fitness, and now you want to compete in CrossFit competitions, and you're like, is keto really the right diet to support you in those types of competitions? I would argue probably not. But now you're so pigeonholed into this kind of dogmatic approach that you've been taught that now this thing is becoming a limitation. So what we always try to do is create that middle, but that middle approach is so hard for people to understand. They like the clarity of do this, not that, and that this is simplistic. But I think that just creates more limitations than it creates benefits for people. It's a great starting point if you're starting at nothing. But that's because when you're starting at nothing, anything will help, right? You don't have to train to get more fit. If you haven't worked out in the last 20 years, you don't need training to get more fit. Just do anything, any type of exercise, any type of movement, walk 10,000 steps, do jumping jacks in your backyard, go do yoga, go do CrossFit, go do any type of fitness, and you'll see a drastic improvement for a short period of time. But then quickly those can become limiting. So that's, I think, the challenge with those dogmatic approaches, and also why they're so attractive to people. So I think that's what helps us at XPT is a lot of people come to XPT after they've started one of those dogmatic approaches, and they've begun to run into a glass ceiling, and they've noticed that continuing to fill this cup that I've been trying to fill for the last decade is no longer going to get me in the direction I want to go. And what got me to where I am now is not what's going to get me to this next stage. And I need some guidance on that. And that's where we try to help provide a little bit more clarity of like, here's the tools you've been using. Here's what's working really well. Here's what's actually happening during that tool. Because maybe you've been following the Wim Hof method for the last 5 years and it's been great for you, but you don't even really understand what it's doing. You're just like, it's amazing and it's helping. What I'm going to help you understand is here's what's actually happening when you use those tools. And therefore, when you want to learn how to use them for the next phase of your life, you'll now have the understanding to be able to implement them appropriately and figure out when it's not the best strategy. So yeah, that's the approach that we take, but it is uniquely challenging in that sense because it's always like, it's like Dr. Andy Galpin always says when people ask him a question, it depends. It's like, that's not the answer anybody wants to hear. That's the reality of physiology and psychology and anything, like being a human, context is king. But if I always tell you it depends, you're like, I'm just going to go to the guy who tells me, eat this. And that's the answer.
I'm pumped that you said that because Dr. Andy Galpin and I have talked about that, right? Where it's like the answer to almost every question is it depends. But what's so important to take away from what you're talking about here, in my opinion, is the level of identity. You're going to do something that's going to get you from A to B. And as you mentioned, if you're going from nothing to something, most things are going to work. Walking 10,000 steps, jumping jacks, any sort of movement, decreasing processed carbohydrates, sleeping more, exposure to sunlight, more water, more hydration, better relationships. All of those things are going to work to move the needle in the right direction. But at some point, if you're just doing the same thing all the time and there's not a depth and understanding with context, as you mentioned, who you were going from A to B is one person. But if you're craving to go from B to C, you actually have to shift your identity. You have to be a different human being. And you've touched on that a lot, which I very much appreciate. It's actually where I got the tagline when I was running the Invictus Mindset podcast, which was, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. And I always very much appreciated the way you articulated that, because I'm in this athlete arena where I've been around professional basketball players, professional NFL players, CrossFit athletes, and it's a huge identity deconstruction to go from self-identifying as an athlete to being, oh, I'm a full-time coach now. I'm a business person. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a podcaster. I'm whatever title the world wants to throw at me and put me in a box. And I think you very much align with that a little bit, where I think in your early days when you were working at the University of Rhode Island, you were categorized as a strength coach. And then later on that evolved into, no, I'm actually a performance coach. And now if I were to observe you, it's like, you're a jack of all trades. You understand business. You understand how to create systems. You're a leader. You're a husband. You're soon to be a father. You're an innovator. You're a scientist. Like, I don't really fit PJ Nestler into a box. You can do a wide range of things, but as human beings, we always want to categorize keto diet, paleo diet, this, that, and it makes it easier to understand. But I don't know if that's the healthiest way to absorb all the information. And so to summarize that a little bit, the word is identity. What are your thoughts on the concept of identity and the process of having to shift who you are in order to become the person that you want to become?
I think it's one of the most important conversations to have, and it's also really difficult. So it was difficult for me to figure out how to approach that with my cousin when we were first talking about it, because I know how far it is from the way people think, especially when you're in the space of like, I want to lose some weight and be a little more fit. But I've also seen so many people just struggle because they never really understand it. And what I like to paint the picture of is like, if the person you are today was going to get you to the person you ultimately want to become, you'd already be there. So something has to change, right? There has to be some sort of change that's going to get you into that next step. And a funny quote that I always like to think of is like, nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you stay with that person, I remember hearing something too from another talk, and it was like, the reason people will not accomplish, or the reason many people will not achieve what they want to achieve and become the person that they ultimately want to become, is because they're so afraid of letting go of the person they are now. But it's necessary. We have to shed that skin if we're ever going to get to that next stage of whatever that is for you, whoever you want to become. So I think that identity shift is such a unique challenge for people, and it's a fear because people are so afraid of like, well, if I'm not this, then who am I? And you gave that example in like being an athlete. If I'm not an athlete, who am I? And when you get lost in that question, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and people flounder in that space, or they're just afraid of it, and they don't know. I think there's also a misperception of what that other person is, right? And we see this in fitness all the time. You take somebody who's trying to get fit, and they're like, but I'm just not like you. Like, you enjoy going for long rucks or working out or eating chicken. Like, I don't enjoy those things. And they think that they put this person that they want to become, they put it into this box, and they go, I could never do that. And I always try to tell you, like, when you become this new person, right, you're talking about a person over here, but you're right here on the spectrum. You're way on the left-hand side, and you're talking about a person way on the right-hand side. I'm not asking you to jump from this left-hand side to the right-hand side. I'm just asking you to take one step to the right. And as you take that step, it's going to reframe what that next step looks like and reframe what the next step. And that next step is always a lot more digestible for you. And then you might get to the middle of that spectrum and be like, man, I'm exactly where I want to be. Or you might get to the middle, and now all of a sudden, because you're in the middle, the right-hand side doesn't look so crazy anymore. Because you're already no longer eating processed foods and you're working out 3 times a week. And it's still crazy for you that somebody wants to do like a 24-hour some crazy endurance event. You're like, wow, that's insane. I never want to be that kind of person. But then you do a 5K and you're like, that was kind of fun. And then you all of a sudden you start doing things, and 10 years from now you're running a marathon and you're like, wow, I turned into that crazy endurance person that I never thought I could become because you took those small steps at a time. Or maybe you never get there because you still think it's crazy, but you're just a little bit more fit and a little bit in the right direction. But that's the thing, is like reshifting that identity. And unfortunately, when you let go of those things, there's also a lot of things that are associated with that identity that are dragging you down. It could be your friend groups. It could be your parents. It could be, honestly, people who still talk to you like you are that. Because you have to make that shift and no longer accept the self-talk and the talk around people that you are that. I had this conversation with a coworker recently who asked me about how he can improve his son's speed. His son's a football player, and he said he's just so slow, and he's in like 7th grade. And I said, here's my recommendations. Here's number 1, here's number 2, and then here's number 3. Don't talk to him like that. Because number 1 and number 2 are great. He's 10 years old. You're not going to get him stronger. You're like, he should be doing these basic training things in order to continually base his athleticism. He should be playing a bunch of sports. And he can't start identifying now as slow, because that's going to be locked into him. And I've seen a lot of kids that just, that's who they are, because their parents have told them, their coaches have told them, and their friends have told them, and they'll never get out of that. And he may never be the fastest kid on the team, but if you want him to have success, you can't start building into his head that he is this slow person, because
it's a label, right? Yeah, it's a label that like sticks with them and ends up being something that like tattoos their minds. And I heard this the other day. It's like what kills most kids' dreams and aspirations is not the actual performance or the sport. It's the drive home.
Yeah. Which is so unfortunate, and that's why I explained to him, because when people ask those questions, I mean, I've trained thousands of youth athletes, and so many of the parents, I'm just like, I'm so sad for these children, the way that they're, because the parents who come and pay me the money that I was charging to train athletes, to train their 10-year-old, probably most of the time have a disproportional understanding of what's important for that child as an athlete. I won't say what's important as a child because I don't know the kid. Like, I'm not going to step on how you should be a parent, but as an athlete and as a developing athlete, what's best for that child is typically not paying some performance director $250 a session for one-on-one private training because you think he's slow or he's weak or he's mentally weak or whatever, because that's actually limiting their development. And a lot of those kids, you'd end up seeing them get overtraining injuries, get burnt out and quit their sports. I mean, probably the most elite kids that I trained in middle school didn't even play their sport in high school. I remember, sadly, one of the baseball kids I was training, he was in there having elbow issues that you see in major league sports at like 12 years old, because
that's brutal.
He had 2 different pitching coaches and he was playing on 2 different teams. So nobody, the major leagues, they shut you down based on your pitch count. And this kid was pitching 3 times what a major league baseball player pitches because he had 3 different coaches that weren't communicating on how much this kid's throwing. And he's getting elbow issues that you don't even see until kids are 25, and he's getting them at 12.
Yeah. It's just the concept of like more is not better, better is better. Let's have a healthy conversation, especially in the developmental stages, around like variance and play and eliciting a vibe and a mood and different planes of motion in different sports, so that the fascia lines don't become so fixated on that one motor recruitment pattern. I mean, we've seen it time and time again with baseball guys that are constantly in this throwing motion. shooting a basketball is actually really helpful. Throwing a football is a slightly different variance as well. I don't know, just exposure to a lot of different sports. Now the fascia lines are a little bit looser. It almost translates to them being better in that sport. But now there's this cognizant component around like specificity is king. They got to like specialize early on, more reps, more this, more. And I think it's doing a disservice to not just the overall development of the performance side of these kids, but also the athlete development of these kids, which is definitely challenging. But I want to take the conversation back to the identity component. And something that I wanted to share with you, PJ, is if you always do what you've always done, you'll always be what you've always been. And you and I talked about that a little bit in relation to you got to change if you want to evolve into the identity of the life that you want to live. But what I wanted to ask you is a part of that is grief. A part of you has to die, or you have to let go of who you once were in order to evolve into this next person. What education and advice do you give to your athletes, and do you cognizantly think about in changing and grieving who you were and evolving and upgrading into who you want to be?
That's a great question. And I think the grief part is interesting because I haven't really explored it from a grieving perspective, but I think that that's probably a really unique way of framing it, because it is the challenge that people run into, which is how do I let go of who I was, and the fear of letting go of who I was, because then I'm not sure who I am. And I think I focus more on probably the second part of that, which is when we can become more sure about who you are, then it lets go of some of that fear. And really the action of driving forward is what cures that fear, because typically that fear is of, we're afraid of step 5, but we're still on step 1. And I always try to say, like, step 5 is going to look different by the time you get to step 3 anyway. So let's not worry about that step 5. But I haven't really, I'll be perfectly honest, I haven't done a ton of, or put a ton of thought into the grief of who you once were. I think, and even the letting go, I think the letting go for me has always been, if I'm afraid that I won't be able to be this person, the only way I can prove to myself that I can be this person is to start challenging that belief by showing up and being that person. And that's what allows me to override this fear, which is, I don't think I can ever be that person. And I always tell people that, like, we could sit here and we could hypothesize about it forever, and you could live in this panic, uncertainty and anxiety, or you can drive forward and find out. And if you go forward and you find out you're not that person, guess where you are? Right where you are right now. So if we can kind of eliminate that fear, or at least put it on hold so we can try to take those steps forward, usually that'll allow people to start to see, okay, I am different than this person that I thought I was. And that's how we can kind of potentially move you in the right direction. But yeah, I haven't approached okay, how do we then grieve that person that we let go of? I've never really approached it that way.
I definitely like that answer. It's something Laird and I have actually talked about, which is something you've talked about before. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if you're spending time with high performers and people that are thought leaders, the people that are challenging you, the people that are calling out poor habits and trying to instill good habits, inevitably it's going to elevate you as well, right? A rising tide lifts all ships. When you think about that in relation to the people that you spend a lot of time with, excluding Perla, because I know you spend a lot of time with her, what's it like rubbing elbows with the XPT community? I mean, some of the people that you guys connect with, Dr. Andy Galpin, Laird Hamilton, Gabby Reece, Mark Roberts, other members of the team that are just incredible human beings, but more importantly, honest, spiritual, well-developed in all the different spokes within the wheel, or as Gabby likes to say, the different buckets. What's that like for you connecting with those guys?
I'm very fortunate and very grateful to be able to do that. I think it's been a huge catalyst for my own development as a human. It is the thing that attracted me to XPT in the first place. I think there was a time in my life, I know there was a time in my life when I was struggling in some of the places that I was in because I felt like I was around people who didn't necessarily have the same drive towards excellence that I was trying in their own professional lives, or just really the drive towards growth. And it was challenging for me because I felt like the weird one. I felt like I was abnormal for like wanting more for myself. And, it just, the people I was around didn't have that same mindset. So I was seeking it in other places, in books and podcasts and YouTube videos and seminars. And I was finding that, or I was seeking that out. Trying to create my own mastermind groups of people to be around. And then I was fortunate to, when I went up to XPT for the first time, and when they were basically auditioning me for this role, and the people that I was sitting in the sauna with were people that were super accomplished and conscious. And that's, I think, a really unique combination. Because I don't care how successful you are. I don't want to be around you if you've just happened to be really successful financially, but you're a piece of crap human.
Totally agree.
There's no value in that to me. And that goes for any area. Like, you could be a great father, but you're a piece of crap in every other area. Like, what I want to be around is the people who've looked at all of these different areas and recognize how important they are and how mutually beneficial they are. So that was the thing when I went to Laird and Gabby's house, is the people that I was with were successful in a variety of areas and were conscious about it, and were still striving for more. And not more like, I need another house in Malibu and I need more money, but like, how can I give back more? How can I be better in a physical space because I've already done so much in this business world? So it's a really awesome thing for me to be around. And then I really recognize the value, or recognize the tendency, which is like, all humans will regress to the mean.
Oh, that's a good one.
So whatever the mean is, right? Like, it doesn't matter where you are, over time you will regress to the mean. If you put a bunch of high performers in a room and then you put them around a vast majority of low performers, those high performers are going to become, we always talk about with A, B, and C players. If you put 2 A players and a ton of C players, and you just make all things the same, those A players are going to slowly become B and maybe even C players. But if you put 10 A players and 2 C players, those C players are most likely going to start to become B players. So I think, like, if you understand that, then it allows you to start to frame the people that you spend the most time with in a way that you're not necessarily saying, like, I only want to be around people who push me to be better. You're saying, I want to be around people who are striving to be better in their own lives, and who model the types of behavior that I want for my own life. Just like we talk about with parenting at the beginning of this, which is, I am going to be the model for this other person, and I want to be around people who model those same things. Because if I'm hanging around a bunch of people who identify as something different than what I want to be, even if I don't end up going that route, it's not going to help me go forward. And it's going to start detracting from my thought process. At the minimum, I'm going to be questioning if that's the route I should be on, because that's what all the other people are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good lens to take on, is just modeling the appropriate behavior, but not just in one arena, but in all the different arenas of life, to ensure that you're trying to just do the next right thing, trying to have financial fitness, emotional fitness, relationship fitness, physical fitness, adventure fitness, and trying your best to elevate all the different arenas in your life. And all the people that we mentioned definitely do those things. When I say 3 different words that associate with you, PJ, and the XPT community, I'm curious your thoughts in each different one of these categories, and that is perform being the first one, breathe being the second one, and recover being the third one.
When I hear perform, I think about how you show up, regardless of the situation. It's how do you show up. When I hear breathe, I think of a lot of things, because that's an element of what I do. But I think of your remote control to your nervous system. And then when I hear recover, I think of putting deposits in the bank account that you can tap into later.
I like that. If we hear the term breath work thrown around a ton, I think it's something like, oh yeah, just breathe better. And I know Laird has talked about, we can go a certain number of days without eating. We can go a certain number of days or hours without water. We can only go a certain number of minutes without breathing. And when it comes to breath work, I feel like it's a term that's thrown around. I feel like a lot of people have heard Wim Hof, different types of yoga breathing. But a few categories that I want to touch base with you on, PJ, are breathing in the morning. Typically, people are getting screen time before sun time. They're anxious. They're trying to figure out how to get themselves either going or kind of calm their nervous system in the morning. And then we look at the two big ones, which are pre-workout breathing and post-workout breathing. And then we're looking at pre-bed. And so I wanted to touch with you on your suggestions as to like different protocols that people can utilize in those four different categories, being morning, pre-workout, post-workout, and pre-bed. What are your thoughts?
I have my own preferences of what I would like to do. I think what I like people to understand is that there's a lot of ways to do it. So personal preference is more important than just what I think. Meaning when I do a morning routine, some people will like to do something that's calming and gets them in the right headspace of focus before they go on to their day, because they know that their day is going to get chaotic as soon as they get out of their bedroom. Other people like to get kind of energized and fired up and stimulated before the day starts. So it's highly dependent on what you prefer. Me personally, I like a little bit more of stimulation in the morning. I like to kind of get balanced and then stimulate a little bit, which I think also helps me from a perspective of getting focused. So that might look like a little bit of starting with a real slow, calm base breathing that just gets me into a headspace of like solely focused. It's just mindfulness practice. And then that's followed by some faster paced breathing patterns that'll stimulate a little bit more of a sympathetic nervous system response that kind of gets everything energized for me in the morning before I kind of take on the day, is the way I look at it. And I have a similar focus pre-workout. Pre-workout is really, that's what we're trying to do, is stimulate. So I'll do a similar type of pattern, much shorter. I'm not trying to create drastic physiological changes in the body in terms of like creating those wonky sensations that come with hyperventilation and fast breathing patterns. So I'll do them with little buffers in between. So it might be a pre-workout breathing might be 5 pretty fast nasal breaths, followed by 3 or 4 kind of just balanced breathing to let everything balance out. And then I might crank up another notch. I'll have 5 fast-paced in the nose, out the mouth power breaths. Again, followed by a few calm nasal breaths to just get me balanced back out so that I don't start to get lightheadedness and all those sensations that come on. And then the last round of that might be 5 fast power breaths through the mouth. And that's a kind of a nice pre-workout thing for me because pre-workout I'm trying to like ramp up and stimulate before I get into the workout. And then at post-workout and bedtime are honestly almost identical, because the principles, what you're trying to do is down-regulate as best you can. You're trying to get your mind off of anything that's creating stress and maintaining this elevated state of arousal, which can arguably be the same. It's not really like the workout mentally is keeping me in an elevated state of arousal. It might be I just finished the workout, so now I'm conscious of what I have coming next and all the things I have to go do. So it's trying to get out of all those things and get mindful and focused in that present moment. And same thing goes for bedtime. I might be focused on stuff that went wrong during the day or things I've got on my list for tomorrow. So step 1 is, the mind controls the body. So your body's going to go where your mind goes. So we need to get in control of the mind first and start to shift that and get control of it. Once we do that, then we can start to incorporate those physiological triggers that will enhance the relaxation of the body. But you can't really do them separately. If your mind is in this heightened state of arousal, your body's not going to get into a relaxation response. So post-workout and bedtime are both kind of similar. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I like to get into parasympathetic positions, which is usually laying down, supine on your back. You can go with your feet elevated on something. Getting into more flexion-based positions is going to be more parasympathetic. I always go eyes closed. I go minimum inputs. A lot of times I'll listen to music, but that's primarily just to block out the external input, so I'm not hearing the car going by or some death metal playing at the gym. It's just allowing me to be internally focused. So I'll put on more like meditation type music that'll just block out external noise. I turn off my DMX playlist that I was listening to while I was working out and shift over. And then the breath pattern is going to look much slower. I love an inhale through the nose and a slow exhale out the mouth with like a hissing or a humming exhale. And then the goal is trying to draw out that exhale to an extended, could be 6, 8, 10 seconds. So a nice easy pattern to remember for that one is a cadence breath, which is a 1-to-2 ratio of inhale to exhale. So 4-second inhale, 8-second exhale. And you can just keep that pattern. And I like the counting of the breath too, because that's a great psychological anchor that allows you to have something to focus on, that therefore your mind doesn't start to wander back onto those things that were creating stress. And yeah, the patterns there are pretty much the same, because the end goal is the same, getting into the most relaxed state I can possibly be.
Those are such phenomenal tips. And they're things that I've used in different capacities. I've definitely also used the XPT app with your guidance and Gabby's guidance and Laird's guidance on there, being able to count through and kind of give the appropriate stimulation, which is audibly very helpful. Breath work is hard. It's also something I feel like that's very misunderstood. But when you do surrender to it, there are sensations that are very cool to experience, and you do see them narrowing your focus and steering you in the right direction. I also really appreciate the counting. It's something that I do in the ice bath sometimes, is rather than setting a time domain, I'll actually count my breaths, and I'll really try my best to to elongate the exhale, and I'll kind of tap my finger kind of on my leg, which kind of gives me an altered source of focus, but then also allows me to be very present in the moment, recognizing not just the gratitude, but just the different sensations that are taking place, which takes you away from, I need to get out of here, this is uncomfortable, why do I do this, and all the nuanced thoughts, or this is what I need to do after this, I don't have time for this. And all of us battle those different forms of penetrating thoughts in the midst of extreme anxiety. It's funny that I see your smirk on your face, because like, I remember when you did the 7 breaths for 7 days, and I was watching yours, I was like, man, PJ's doing this, I got to do this. And so every day, first thing in the morning, I was going out and jumping into the cold tub and doing the 7 elongated breaths. And I'm not going to lie, man, I had a ton of resistance on like day 4 or 5. And it just was really leaning into the habits of the hissing on the exhale, the tapping of the finger, and really realizing that every time I do it, I never regret it. Every time I don't do it, I beat myself up, because there is a confidence component of like, I'm doing the hard thing. Most people aren't going to do this thing. Who do you want to be? Make that decision right now, and you can celebrate it later. What are your thoughts on that component, where there is this psychological component of, this is the standard that I hold myself to. This is the man or the woman that I want to be. I need to surrender and do the hard thing even when I don't want to, or when it's inconvenient, or when it's raining, or when I feel like I don't have time. We need to make the time to do it.
I think it's the most important thing possible, because we talked all about identity before, and like, if you're not accountable to yourself, who are you accountable to? Like, what's the point? And that's what I think people get lost in. They need a trainer so they're accountable to show up, or tell somebody they're going to do something so they're accountable to that person. For me, I think integrity is one of my strongest core values. And to me, integrity is just, it's who you are in the dark. Are you the same person when you're home by yourself that you say you are publicly, or you express you are, or you even think you are? And I'll be quite honest, that 7-day ice bath challenge sucked for me. I didn't want to do it. It was 7 days long. I think at least 4 out of the 7 I didn't want to do. 2 of them I'm pretty sure I did at night, because I was having battles with myself. One of the days I was literally like, I'm not doing this. I have nothing to prove. I've already done ice baths. I've done it for 30 days straight. I've done it for 18 minutes at a time. There's nothing to prove to myself. And all I kept thinking was, the thing I have to do is hold myself accountable, because I said I was going to do it. I said I was going to do these 7 days, so I need to do these 7 days because that's who I am. And it's most important that I prove to myself that I am this person that I say I am. It doesn't matter if nobody else is going to know. Like, nobody else is going to find out. But it was challenging for me to do that. And after it, I was like, I don't like doing ice baths in the morning. It's just not a thing. I don't feel accomplished when I do it. If some people love it, it's just not for me. But I think the reason people love it is because they're still at the state where they're trying to prove to themselves that they are this person who will choose the hard thing or will do this thing. And that's why I say I don't like it or I don't need it, because I make those decisions constantly in my life. And I fail some of them, like to your point earlier, you just have to win the majority. But I know that when push comes to shove, I'm going to be faced with a decision. Do I take the easy route or the hard route? And I know that most of the time in my life, across all areas, I'm going to lean into the hard route. And there are times that I'll have to choose those challenges to keep proving to myself that I am this person that I say I am. But that also is going to make me comfortable that when I walk away from something, I still am confident in my identity. And I had an event that I did recently that I left because it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And part of me was in my head of like, did I leave because this is going to be really hard? And I was like, I was confident in myself that like, this is not what I wanted to do. This is not what I got into this for. I know I could accomplish this thing if I need to, because I've proven that to myself time and time again. But it's just not what I set out for. And I had the confidence in my identity where 10 years ago, I would have suffered through that whole event for the next 12 hours just because I need to prove to everybody else in that group that I'm not a weak person or whatever. Like, I know that walking away from that group, there were people who were like, oh, what a wuss, he bailed. And I was just like, I don't care. It's not about them. It's about me and proving to myself who I am. And I know that I'm not negotiating with myself. I've already done this many, many times to make sure that I am conscious of that self-talk. And I'm aware of when I'm trying to rationalize my way out of it, and allowing that kind of inner weakness to come up and conquer my thoughts. And when I'm like, okay, no, I'm not making this choice emotionally, right? We talked about this at the beginning too. I am not in this emotional state. I'm not at the bottom and making this choice out of fear or anything. I'm making this conscious decision in a state of logic and understanding, because I was able to take those breaths and be in this state. And now I can make the choice. If I want to get out of the ice bath, I can get out of the ice bath, because I've gotten to the point that I'm in control, and therefore I have the capability to make those decisions.
And that's my favorite thing about you, PJ. It's the integrity that you hold yourself to, doing the right thing when nobody's watching, knowing who you are, knowing what you want, knowing where you want to go, and then sharing those lessons with the world with so much passion and authenticity, which I really appreciate, man. I want to wrap things up, and I want to share with you just a concept that I heard recently. I call it the bounce. And it subtly comes from the world of grieving a little bit, where it's like when you lose a loved one, everybody's there to love and support you right off the bat. But that's when the ball's going down. When it gets really hard is actually when it hits the ground and goes to bounce, when, 6 months later, people aren't calling anymore. They're not checking in on you anymore, and it's now you versus you. Do you make the decision to go to the bar and go drink and make poor choices? Or are you making the decision to practice breath work, to get in the sun, to associate yourself around high performers and people that are good people, to practice the art of good habits when nobody's watching, you're not getting the pat on the back, and nobody's reprimanding you if you make bad choices? It's you versus you. And I think that's such an important concept, because it very much relates to proving yourself in an ice bath. In the beginning, you film it every time, you show everybody, you're getting that external validation that, hey, I do the hard thing, give me the pat on the back, I'm the tough guy. But then it really becomes, whoa, this actually puts me in a better mood. This helps me manage stress better. This is something that's really hard, especially when I have it at my house and I do it by myself, and there's nobody there cheering me on, or there's not that elevated state of arousal. It's actually just like, man, it's me versus you, Tub. Here we go again. And it's not super exciting. There's not applause. There's not anything that really gives you this gold star anymore. But you realize that that's just like sharpening the sword just a little bit. And you know that there's going to come a point where you have that tool and you've consistently done the hard thing. So when you need it most, you have access to being the cool, calm, collected rock that can then support all the people around you. And I don't even just think of it as just the ice bath, man. It's the mindset. It's controlling your physiology so that you can be cool, calm, and collected in the moment of extreme stress. When all hell and the plan goes to the wayside and nobody's there, you are. And you show up consistently over time to help people up, steer people in the right direction. You can speak confidently in the moment of chaos. And that's just a level of leadership. That's something that I want to be that guy. I think you want to be that guy. And hopefully the sharing of some of these storytelling lessons today helps other people want to be that person as well. And, it doesn't mean you have to start at 32 degrees for 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe you start at 55 degrees. And it's just an analogy of just do the next right thing. And I think you and I will also both agree. Another great starting point for people is pick up a copy of Atomic Habits. James Clear does an awesome job of motivating, inspiring people about atomic habits. Nasal breathe as much as you possibly can in your day-to-day life. Eat real food. Treat people appropriately. Move as often as you can. And anything else that you'd love to add to that or maybe take away from that could be good pillars for people to optimize their life?
I think the only other one I'd add to that is what we were saying before, which is be around good people. Like,
yeah,
build your circle and your tribe in people that are modeling the behaviors and the habits and the success that you want to have in areas of your life. Because all of those other things are super important. And then that community pillar is equally as important, or possibly the glue that holds it all together.
Yeah, for sure, man. Just out of curiosity, where does your primal nature come from? Where does that where do you find that in your life? Just this element of kind of ancestral living and really leaning into primal attributes.
20 years of working in the performance space and the evolution of learning and just starting to find that like the things that make people successful in sport are the same things that make people successful in elite military, are the same things that make people successful in business. And all of a sudden you start to see that there's just these elements that the people who do it best the people who do it best for the longest tend to have a lot of similarities in performance. And it seems to be all the way whittled down to the most simplest things, which is like, you have to be a high performing human. And when you become a high performing human, a lot of those are based on those kind of ancestral tenets and those principles that we mentioned. And you will always have a limitation. There will always be a performance anchor that's limiting you if you've neglected one of those areas. So if you really want to achieve like a lot of levels of success in your life, whatever that means to you, you've got to look at that. And I think that's what it came from. I mean, it hasn't always been that way. So it was just the evolution of performance with me that I was fortunate to work with in the space, reading the science, doing the stuff, training the athletes, and then working with high performers across a variety of spectrums and starting to look at like, what are the semblances here that are equal? Like what are the threads that are all the same across these different categories? So that's really what it's come down to. It went from hyper complex to super simple, which I think is always the evolution of someone's understanding. It starts out with nothing, and then you think you know everything, and then you think you know everything, but it's super complex, and then you go all the way back in the circle to like, it's actually really simple. Like, at the most complex levels.
For sure, man. Simplicity truly is the ultimate sophistication.
Yeah, it's that interesting side.
Dude, you're one of my favorite people. I love when I get to cross paths with you, and we talked about it frequently today. Do hard things. Everything you want is typically on the other side of the shit that you're probably avoiding. And PJ, it's a pleasure crossing paths. Where can people find you?
You can find me on everything XPT. All the stuff we talked about is XPT Life on social and xptlife.com, etc. And then the only place I'm public, just sharing random thoughts, is my social media at Coach PJ Nestler. But Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Very cool, man. Well, congratulations on soon to become a father and
Thank
all
you.
the amazing things that come with that. The fear, the uncertainty, the excitement, the love, the learning experiences. Please give Perla a big hug from me. I appreciate your time and your energy today, man. And I've got to throw it in there today that all of us should stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. And our tagline for the ALLSMITH project is greatness is forged, not found. Until next time, guys. Thanks, PJ.
Thank you.